Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah. It's been a while since I've done a podcast, but I hope everyone had a great holiday. I love NBA Christmas games so much. They're just so much fun to watch. All the best teams playing on one of the best days of the year. Can't really complain at all, but I won't be talking too much about it. I may reference it once or twice, but I will talk about LeBron and his Lakers, the Jazz making headway in a close Western Conference, the Heat coming up big in a tight Eastern Conference, and we'll see who's hot and who's not before I give you my top 5 players of the last decade, as this is my last podcast until the new year. So, now, I'm talking LeBron James because there's been some big news. He is the Associated Press Male Athlete of the Decade. That is a huge, huge honor. That's over the last 10 years who's been the best athlete in all of sports, all around the world. Not just basketball, but every single sport. And it's crazy to me that LeBron James has won this. Not crazy because he's not deserving, because he absolutely is very deserving of this, but because there is so much competition within all kinds of different sports. But I think it's definitely valid. That whole list of people that have won this award include Tiger Woods, Wayne Gretzky, Arnold Palmer, incredible athletes that have just been, hailed as, all-time greats. And now LeBron James can put his name next to those type of people. And he won this by a landslide, which is the part that's really shocking to me, because the people that he beat out, are just as valid and people can make just as big of a point for them to be, the person that have won this award. He outpaced the runner-up and Tom Brady of the New England Patriots, who have been a dynasty. He's gone to championships. He's won more championships than LeBron. He's done it. He's dominated football. He lost a couple Super Bowls here and there from crazy games, but Tom Brady is making case for being the best quarterback of all time, maybe best football player of all time. I'm not getting that. I'm not a football expert. Leave that for the football podcast. But, Tom Brady is a big name, and he definitely could have won this award as well. He also beat out Usain Bolt, who was third. He dominated all the sprinting, of course, of 2012 and 2016 Olympics. He's, a freak of nature, just how fast he is and how big and powerful he is when he's striding down and sprinting, so he definitely could have won this as well. Lionel Messi was fourth. I think this may have done with the fact that, soccer is just not as popular, at least not in the U.S. Globally, I think globally the player of the decade has to be Lionel Messi. He's one of the greatest talents of our generation. The guy has 6 Ballon d'Ors. If you don't know what that is, that's the Golden Ball Award. And you get it for being the best player, and he has 6 of them. The next highest person has 5, that's Cristiano Ronaldo, but these two are in a league of their own. Because after that, I think the person that has the most has like 3 or something like that, maybe 2. So for them to win it as much as they have, dominated the game of soccer, since it is such a great global game, for them to have dominated for this long, I think that probably would have been my decision. He came in 4th though, and Michael Phelps, obviously the U.S. swimmer who retired as history's most decorated Olympian with 28 medals, 23 of them being gold, and he was 5th on this list. So LeBron James beat out some high-profile people to win this prestigious award, and he should feel very honored. And I think he does as well. He recognizes what this stands for, and the kind of platform he has based on winning this award now. And so he has a lot to be proud of for sure. Including playoffs, no one in the NBA scored more points than LeBron in the past 10 years. He started the decade at 124th on the league's career scoring list, but now he's about to pass Kobe Bryant for number 3, and then number 2, Karl Malone, and number 1, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar are also within reach. So Kareem is within reach, which is crazy, and I think he's going to do it too with the way that LeBron's been going, the way he's been operating throughout his career. He just doesn't seem to be slowing down, so he can play for a few more years, and with the way he's been averaging points every single year, it's definitely possible for him. I don't think that's necessarily his goal. He's not looking at this and saying, oh, I need to average this much to get there, average this much each year, I need to stay this healthy, play this many games, whatever. He's not looking that much into it. I bet you it's definitely on his mind, though, because for him to go out as number 1 best scorer ever in history is definitely something he would love to put his name next to. So yeah, I think he's definitely going to get that. And it's just, I think that this award really speaks to just, not just the fact that he's just so naturally gifted, not just with his size, but in his talent, but his work ethic is crazy. If you ever heard of anyone talking about LeBron James' work ethic, the guy just strives to be great, even though he's already gotten so many accolades. He's been hailed as the king of the NBA the last 10 years. He's been hailed as the possible GOAT, maybe even better than Michael Jordan. And this guy still gets in the gym and works hard every single day to be even better. He always has a mission and he's always working. And this is the reason why he's been so successful for so long. He puts so much effort into his craft and puts so much effort into his body as well, which is why he's been able to sustain this long NBA career that probably will go on for another 4 years. Maybe even more. Who knows? The guy is just crazy. A little recap of his decade for the reason why he won this award. It really started off in 2010 with, the big decision. I think that's actually what the show where, he made this decision was called, The Decision. It was a big show to announce where he's going to land. And I think he did it to raise money for charity, which speaks to his character as well. But we'll get into that. But yeah, the decision to head to South Beach with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, it completely flipped the NBA on its head, kind of changed, how the NBA is viewed in terms of creating super teams. People can argue that the Celtics did it first, but they didn't really see teams start popping off and creating super teams until you saw this team up. No one really saw this coming, and it was a huge, huge deal back then. But it meant so much for LeBron's career. He had struggled a little bit in Cleveland, being just the one guy that an entire country, city, whatever you want to call it, relied on just him to carry their team to a championship. And he almost did it too. That's what's even crazier. But he had to leave, and he got so much backlash for it just because he's from there, and he ended up leaving, and they thought it was a huge betrayal. Going to South Beach, he just wanted to leave them, basically, because they weren't good enough. And I don't necessarily think that's what he was doing. I think he had a grand plan in his mind from the beginning. When he went to Miami, he was already one of the best players in the NBA, but now he's really starting to learn how to play with a team with great talent. And not only that, he also really growed as a leader, I would say, just because you're teaming up with a guy like Dwayne Wade, who's already won a championship. Teaming up with Chris Bosh, who is an all-star, who is one of the better players in the league, and he has to be the face of that team. So he's got to work with big all-stars before, and he's never done that before. So I think that was huge for him. Also, the fact that because they're so good, he gained that playoff experience that he really needed, not just as, a kid that's leading Cleveland, to a championship by himself, but with a team. And then eventually, of course, Cleveland forgave him when he returned. And it was a huge deal that he was coming back to Cleveland because he made it known that he has a mission. He wants to win a championship for the city of Akron, to win a championship in Cleveland. It's never been done. And he wanted to be the one that did it. And to be honest with you, he probably would have won the 4 straight finals he went to if it wasn't for the Golden State Warriors coming out of nowhere and taking over the league. So without the Warriors being his kryptonite, I think LeBron would have a lot better finals record. He'd have a lot more championships. Cleveland would have a lot more championships. And it all would be, all nice. He won 2 in Miami, and then he won the one in Cleveland as well, 2016 NBA championships in historic fashion, very much to my dismay because I'm a Golden State Warriors fan, so this loss was devastating to me. It made me want to absolutely hate LeBron James. I mean, being matched up with him 4 finals in a row, I really did. I hated the guy, but you can't hate greatness. Yeah, I mean, you just have to sit back and appreciate just how good he is, because in that first finals that the Warriors won and they were matched up against each other, LeBron was by himself. Had Kyrie for not even the whole first game of that series, and Kevin Love was out too. So LeBron almost, pushed us to 7 games. We won in 6. And then he actually did push us to the limit and beat us in 2016 in a game 7. Kyrie hit the shot, but LeBron's the one that really, really brought Cleveland to that championship. And that chase down block on Iguodala, one of my least favorite plays of the entire decade, probably my entire existence, but it's probably the most historic for LeBron James because of what it meant. It was in the final seconds of the game. He gets a big block down the stretch. He's become clutch just because of that. And then they go on and win a championship for the first time ever in Cleveland. And, he made true to his promise, and he won. Thankfully for us, it meant we get Kevin Durant, and then we took over, and LeBron's reign ended. But that's not the point. We're talking about LeBron. He then, after fulfilling his promise, he did leave. Another era ended, and he went to LA. And I think in a lot of ways, this wasn't necessarily getting ready for retirement, because LeBron still had a lot in the tank. He definitely wanted another challenge, but I think it definitely, in moving to LA, it sets up a life after the game for him. And by that, I mean, he's working on Space Jam right now, a goal he's wanted for years now, an idea he's had in his head that's finally coming to fruition with the work that he's putting in, and they're filming it right now. And, this award isn't just what's done between the lines, and I think he recognizes that as well. He also opened up a school in Akron, Ohio in 2018, which I thought was spectacular. I mean, it was such a good feel-good story to see a homegrown guy give back to his community by doing something as big as opening a school, and it's been a huge success as well. He's a big voice as well in terms of social matters, using his platform because he has so many followers on Twitter and just has a big platform in the NBA. I mean, he's the face of the NBA, so for him to voice his opinions and just try and make a difference with what he's talking about in the social matters he touches on, and really just shows where he's at in terms of his mentality when it comes to certain things, is really important, I think. So I think all of these kind of play a factor into why, he's the male athlete of the decade. And like I said, I think it's very deserving, even though he only won 3 championships. He did go to the finals 8 straight times. He's been dominant in the NBA. I mean, no one can dispute that at all. And he's just a stand-up guy who's just so versatile. Even outside of the game, he's got Space Jam, like I said. He's got his own show. So he really just touches on a lot of areas that make him a great human being as well as a great basketball player. So this is definitely why he's getting this award, and it's definitely deserving for sure. And now that he's in LA, he's on a mission for another championship. And during that mission, there are going to be some ups and downs. So we'll check in with the West's best team coming up next.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how LeBron James has won the Associated Press Male Athlete of the Decade, and very deservedly so. We kind of went over what he's done this past decade, his journey into being who, what his legacy will be for years to come, and just talked about his character as well, because he's just a stand-up guy. And, now he's on another mission. He started a new era, or not a new era, a new era in LA. He left Cleveland again. Now he's in LA trying to win another championship there. Kind of a new test for him. And, they've been struggling a little bit. They had a 4-game skid. They lost to the Clippers on Christmas Day. There's my reference. They lost. That was their 4th straight loss. And that was a really big Western Conference matchup. Whether you want to play too much into it being early on in the season or not, it definitely was a big matchup, and I bet you the players thought of it that way too. There's just an added element to Christmas Day games, and I don't know why. I think it's because it's just what it means, because everyone's tuning in. It's Christmas Day. Let's watch some NBA. But these are the two teams that a lot of people expect to be the Western Conference Finals, and the teams that really made blockbuster moves in the offseason in terms of who was going to get Kawhi. It ended up being the Clippers, and they got PG out of nowhere. So they kind of stole the spotlight a little bit in LA until LA filled out their roster. And, LeBron, AD, Kawhi, PG, you can't really write a better story than that. PG didn't even really play that great. He only had 17 points in this game, whereas Kawhi did really well. He had 35 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists. And then Harrell also added 18 points. And so there was a bunch of decent contributions from the entire squad, really. And LeBron and AD, they're always going to be doing their thing. They played great. Anthony Davis had 24 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals. So he was getting it done on both ends of the floor in this big matchup that I think meant a lot to him as well, because, he's been the sidekick of LeBron James in terms of their star power. But this could be a moment where he really steps up and carries the team. I think, and at moments, he's going to need to be the one that carries the team, because LeBron, not because he's slowing down, but because, you need to rely on your star power. So that's what LeBron did in Cleveland with Kyrie. And now I think AD's got to really find a way to influence the game in bigger ways. And I think this was a good test for him. And he had good stats in this game as well. So it was good to see. And LeBron, he put up 23 points, had 9 rebounds, 10 assists, 2 steals, and a block as well. So he was all over the court. He's been really thriving in this point forward role. 10 assists is really great, and he was just 1 rebound away from a triple-double. And then, of course, he's a force on defense as well, so we already know that. Kuzma actually added 25 points, which was really good for them to see, because Kuzma, is a player that should be coming off the bench and giving high volume efforts. And I don't think he's necessarily lived up to that expectation yet. But a 25-point performance is definitely important, especially on Christmas Day. But other than that, there was no contribution from the rest of the bench. I mean, to put in perspective, there was a combined 4 points from McGee and Dwight Howard. Those are your 2 big centers that you're used to throwing up the lob to and just getting easy buckets that way. But yeah, each of them had 2 points, and they just couldn't get enough contributions elsewhere other than their 2 big stars. And they ended up losing this game 111-106. So there's a lot of questions being asked now about the Lakers. They're still first in the West, but they just lost their biggest Western Conference rival, their LA rival. So there's a lot of questions being asked. They lost 4 games in a row now, but they did end up getting back on track with a win against Portland, 128-120. And Portland's kind of been up and down this season. They're currently on a three-game losing streak and are 8th in the West. But the thing about Portland is they have a lot of potential. Just the players that they have and the roster that they have, if they can get the right rhythm, the right team chemistry, they can be a dangerous team in the West. I mean, they've shown it over years past. They can't really get past that playoff hump. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Rockets are always in there, and the Warriors have just dominated the West, so they really haven't stood a chance. But Portland's always been a team that can create something, especially with their backcourt. Probably the best backcourt in the NBA right now, just because the Splash Brothers are out injured. Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. And then you add in Hassan Whiteside, that's a big three, and then Carmelo Anthony Carmelo Anthony, he's the veteran. He's a guy that can, add a lot of wisdom, a lot of extra points as well. So it's a good squad, and I think they could do a lot of things. This game was actually super close, but what really propelled the Lakers over the Trailblazers was LeBron's 16 assists. Also, just great contribution from the whole squad. But LeBron getting 16 assists is huge. Like I said, he's thriving in this point forward role, and he's seeing the court extremely well. He reminds me a lot of Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers, and he's kind of reviving that right now. Kuzma actually had a team-high 24 points. So back-to-back games where Kuzma was being very impactful coming off the bench. Had a team-high, too. So he beat out all of the starters in terms of getting points. And then 4 players off the bench in double figures. So just a much better effort from the entire team than the game where they played against the Clippers. And I think, it's a good response for the Lakers. They want to be a championship team. So if you lose one game, you got to bounce back the next one. That's exactly what they did. And then they recently played the Dallas Mavericks on Sunday night. And they have been back-to-back winning ways with Luka returning. He's been out injured with an ankle injury, but now that Luka's back, they've been playing a lot better. And so this was a really good test for the Mavericks to see where they're at, because they were still floating around the top tier of the Western Conference even without Luka. But having him back, that star power, you kind of want to get back to that second place spot and get back on a roll. Now they're currently in 5th after this loss, but before it, they were in 3rd, so they're still in that same conversation. It's just a really close Western Conference, and we'll get into that later. And after a game where the Mavericks scored a franchise record 24 3-pointers, and they dropped 141 points against the Warriors the other night, they just really struggled shooting the ball. And the Lakers took advantage. They shot 36% from the field compared to the 48% from the Lakers. And so when you're shooting that poorly from the field, even if you out-rebound them, which they did, it's going to be tough. You got to make your shots, and they just weren't doing it. And so the Lakers ended up winning this game 108-95. And the Lakers took the lead pretty early on in the game and just never gave it back. They actually had a 17-point lead at one point, so good on the Mavericks for trying to get back into this game late, but they just really didn't. They just ran out of time. The reason why the Lakers won this game, though, is because they dominated the paint. They scored 54 points down low compared to the Mavs scoring 32. And the Lakers also shared the ball extremely well, and they had 28 total assists to the Mavs' 17 assists. And I'll let you take a guess on who had the most assists in this game. And I bet you a lot of you are going to say LeBron James. I've said it already twice now. He's just really thriving in this point forward position. He had 13 assists in this game after following up a 16 assist performance against the Blazers and a 10 assist performance against the Clippers. So he's just getting in double figures regularly at this point. I think he's also leading the league in assists as well, if I'm not mistaken. He also had 13 points and 6 rebounds, so not the most prolific numbers for him. 13 points is pretty low, but the reason why we're highlighting LeBron is because he has impactful numbers. 13 assists makes up for the fact that he didn't score 13 points. Those 13 assists are probably shots he could have taken himself, but he finds better shots and people that are just more open and more efficient shots. We talked about the field goal percentage. Mavericks didn't shoot the ball well. And the reason why the Lakers probably shot the ball better is because they have better opportunities, better looks to shoot the ball. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that LeBron is just, passing to all his wide open teammates. His vision's crazy. Real point guard numbers in this game. He ended up hitting 9,000 assists as well in this game because of how many assists he's been getting recently. And Kobe was in attendance as well. So it's definitely cool for the old to see the new. And, the baton's been passed to LeBron. He's taken over now. But his buddy AD also added 23 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. He had 2 steals and a block. So typical numbers for AD. He's having a great year. I think he should be in the conversation for MVP at this point. If he hasn't yet, people are sleeping on him. There was solid bench contribution again. And you'd expect it to come from Kuzma after what I've just said. He scored 25 and 24 in the last 2 games. But actually in this game, Kuzma had 0 points, which was really surprising and kind of disappointing as well. He shot 0% from the field. Obviously, he had no points. Couldn't get to the line either. So he really struggled. But thankfully, his teammates had his back. KCP had 19 points. Dwight Howard stepped up. He had 15 points off the bench. McGee had 11 points. Danny Green had 10 points. So just really solid contribution throughout the entire squad. And, team wins like this are the reason why they're so successful and why they're still first in the West. The Mavericks, like I said, struggled. A big reason why is Luka only had 19 points, 4 rebounds, and 7 assists. But the biggest number for him is that he had 6 turnovers. I know that Luka has the ball in his hand most of the time for the Mavericks, but 6 turnovers for him is definitely not where he wants to be at. He's so much better than turning the ball over that much. And for him to only score 19 points was really surprising to me, especially because not too long ago, before his injury, he had a record going on where he had scored 20 points, gotten 5 boards and 5 assists for consecutive games. I think it snapped around 18 games or something like that. But he had this streak where he passed Michael Jordan as well. So it was interesting to see that he didn't get into those numbers, but probably because, he's a big reason why the Mavericks are so successful. So the Lakers' game plan has to be to try and shut him down. He just struggled this game. And speaking of struggling, Porzingis could not do anything in this game. He only had 11 points, 7 rebounds, and he had no assists in this contest. So I think he really struggled against a matchup with Anthony Davis, LeBron James bumping with him, and then JaVale McGee and, Dwight Howard bumping him down low. Even though Porzingis can stretch it out, playing against big players like this, the same size as him, and also great defenders in Anthony Davis, who should be one of the Defensive Player of the Year candidates, it was definitely tough for him. He struggled. And then the next highest scorer had 4, and that was DeLon Wright, and he had 3 steals, which is pretty good for the defensive side, but there just wasn't enough scoring. They struggled big time. But yeah, there were some double-digit scores, but just nothing high volume. So it wasn't enough, and now the Mavs fall on the table, but are only 2 games out of second. But a game behind them is the Utah Jazz, who have found their groove recently. We talk about their come up and what it all means in the West right now, coming up next.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Lakers got over their 4-game skid with a couple of wins against Portland and another one against the Dallas Mavericks, who can be a force in the Western Conference now that Luka's back especially. But the Lakers are rolling, and they're still first in the West, but they're not the only ones making noise in the West. Even though they're at the top, there are people below them that, have been shifting around, coming up from nowhere, and one of those teams is the Utah Jazz. They've been playing really well. Even though I've talked about it, they've been very underperforming in my opinion, but they've had some big wins recently. And, one of them was against the Portland Trailblazers as well, even though the Lakers just beat them. And even though they have been underperforming too, like I said, they're in 8th right now, they're a great squad. They have so many great pieces that I've already touched upon, and a lot of them played really well in this game, actually. Lillard especially, who led the way. He had 34 points, 4 rebounds, 8 assists, and he was 7 of 13 from 3. So he was just torching the Jazz. But McCollum, his partner in crime, poured in 25 points. And then Melo also added 12 points and 7 rebounds. So he's still solidly contributing. You could definitely expect more points from him, but didn't see it in this game. And, the whole team as a whole really just got outshined by Donovan Mitchell, who has been stepping up recently. He's been playing like his Rookie of the Year campaign playing. He's been going off. He scored 35 points in this game, had 3 rebounds and 7 assists. So even though he's not the point guard, he's still finding his teammates and still finding ways to get his team involved, and poured in 35 points. So he played really well. Ingles as well, just a sharp shooter. He was 6 of 10 from three-point land. He had 26 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists. Ingles, I think, is so slept on. He's just a quiet player. You wouldn't necessarily think that he's a good player because he has the definition of a dad bod that a lot of people would be like, how is this guy on the court with all these crazy athletes? But he just is such a sharp shooter, one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Bogdanovich as well, he added 16 points. And Gobert actually had a big game this game. He had 16 points, but the reason why he had such a big game is he had 15 boards. So he was bumping around with Hassan Whiteside down low, and he was beating him. He was beating him to the rim a lot. And Clarkson as well, they recently acquired him to bolster their bench because, they've been kind of struggling as of late. And so they acquired Clarkson through a trade, the first trade, I think, of this new NBA season, and he added 9 points in this game. So it was a good, solid contribution off the bench. This was a really good 121 to 115 win for them, but I don't think beating Portland necessarily would raise too many eyebrows. Like, why am I talking about them beating Portland? Well, because they beat Portland, and then they went on to beat the Los Angeles Clippers. Yes, the same Clippers that just beat the Lakers. Yeah, Utah Jazz beat them 120 to 107, and it was a great performance. A big reason for these back-to-back wins was Donovan Mitchell. He went off again. He had 30 points, 7 rebounds, and 9 assists. So he was flirting with a triple-double in this game, and he was getting buckets against a team where, they have such great defensive players. Pat Beverly, whether or not people want to think he's a good defender or not, or just a nuisance, he is a pretty decent defender. Kawhi Leonard, of course. Paul George, one of the best two-way guards in the league, if not the best. Probably was tasked with a lot of, guarding Donovan Mitchell. And Mitchell just still went crazy. And not only that, all 5 starters for the Utah Jazz were in double-figure scoring. Ingles had 15 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists. And all his points, by the way, were behind three-point land. So he was just catch and shoot all night. Bogdanovich gave 17 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 steals. So he was super productive. O'Neal had 11 points, and Gobert had 12 points with 8 rebounds. Not as impactful as his last game, but, still pretty good numbers for their center. And then Jordan Clarkson, like I just said, they recently acquired to bolster the bench. Well, he's doing just that. Off the bench, he scored 19 points. He outscored, some of the starters on the Jazz. So he's been playing pretty well too. As well as the Jazz did play in this game, and as good as their stats look with Donovan Mitchell going off the way he did, and Ingles starting to torch it up in the league again, it was a lot of the reason why they won this game is because the Clippers were just bad. They just did not play well. Kawhi Leonard, you expect a lot from Kawhi Leonard. You expect him to be all over the court in terms of grabbing boards, in terms of scoring high volume amount of points, but he only had 19 points in this game. He only had 4 rebounds in this game. He did have 6 assists, which is pretty impressive for him, and 2 steals, which you expect because he's one of the best defenders in the league. But 19 points was very underwhelming for him. I definitely think he could have added a lot more into this game. Paul George as well. He gave 20 points, which is a solid contribution, but when you're a star like Paul George, I think he needs to be adding just a little bit more, especially in this new age NBA where players are pouring in crazy numbers. There will be games like these where, you have a little bit of lull in your game and you don't score as much, but 20 points I don't think is necessarily what you can expect from Paul George. He did grab 10 boards though, so he had a very quiet double-double in this loss. Zubac actually played pretty well. He had 17 points and 12 rebounds. So those are big numbers you wouldn't necessarily expect from Zubac, but that's really good, solid contribution from him. Lou Will off the bench always gets buckets. He had 16 points, 4 rebounds, and 9 assists. And then Patrick Beverly had 12 points as well, but overall, it just wasn't enough. And the Utah Jazz now are making noise. They beat the Clippers, one of the best teams in the West. And they're 3 games back from being in second place. The West right now is just crazy how close it is. 2 through 6, 2 through 7 if you want to add in a couple more teams. But yeah, first place right now is LA. There's no question about it. They're the best team in the Western Conference. Even though they did raise some eyebrows by losing 4 in a row, but it's only a 2.5 game cushion that they have right now sitting in first place, but I just don't see a lot of people combating them to be in that first place range. I mean, the Lakers did lose 4 in a row, but I don't see them doing that too often this season. And then second place right now is Denver, who's 23-9, who've had some recent success. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games. I mean, we talked about them last podcast. They're one of the hotter teams in the NBA, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have a pretty easy schedule as of late. The teams they've beaten, aren't necessarily the top teams in the NBA. It's not like they're playing the Bucks and then the Raptors the next day, or the Clippers and then the Lakers the next day after that. Now they're playing some lower tier teams in either conference, and so they're sitting in second right now. They're only 2.5 games back, like I said, of the Lakers. But I think this is, a spot where they'll be in. They'll probably fluctuate 2 through 6, go in and out. But, they're a team that have a lot of talent and have a lot of capability to stay here if they can find the right chemistry and stay consistent. That's their biggest thing, is consistency. Jokic is starting to add a little bit more to the team that, you would expect from Jokic and that you didn't get early on in the season. So that is a very good sign for them. And then coming in third is the LA Clippers, who we just talked about. They just lost to the Utah Jazz. They've been very inconsistent. They're 1 game back behind Denver, but it's just been rough for them lately. They beat the Lakers, so they show up for big games. But these little games in between, they just lose these weird games that make me a little concerned about their capabilities of going deep into the playoffs. Obviously, the playoffs are a different animal, and when it comes to that, you kind of flip this switch and you start playing harder. And they have that capability, but I just haven't seen it yet, so I'm not completely sold on the Clippers. They're sitting in third right now. Behind them right now is fourth in Houston, who are 22-11, so they could win a game and be tied for third place with the Clippers. But they recently lost to the 2 worst teams in the Western Conference, the Warriors and the Pelicans. They lost to both of them. They lost to Warriors on Christmas Day and the Pelicans a couple days ago. But it's pretty crazy. The Warriors have been decent lately. They won 4 in a row before losing to the Mavericks the other night, like I said. They had a franchise record of 24 threes, though, so that's kind of tough to beat. And then the Pelicans have kind of turned things around of some sorts. But then again, Harden didn't play. He had a toe injury, so I don't think the Rockets have too much to worry about, and they're sitting pretty comfortably right now. They can definitely push to be higher in this table, and they definitely will before, it's all said and done. Fifth right now is the Mavericks. They kind of fluctuate as well, like I said. They started out in third place at the beginning of the night, dropped all the way to fifth now. But they got Luka back, so that's definitely a good sign for them. They've got a lot of momentum, and they have a lot of capability and potential. So sitting in fifth right now. And then sixth is the Utah Jazz. We've been talking about them. And right behind them in seventh is the Thunder, who are kind of lurking. They're not as close as 1 through 6, but they're close enough to make it interesting. So 2 through 7 right now, or 1 through 6, honestly, is separated by just a few games. So on any given day, these teams can fluctuate in terms of which place they're in the Western Conference. So, it's still early, but it's just really interesting to see all this movement happening in the Western Conference. And speaking of all kinds of movement, a lot is happening in the East as well. I mean, we'll talk about the Heat stacked up in the East coming up next.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah. We were just talking about how the Utah Jazz have started to make some noise in the Western Conference. They've been playing really well as of late. We'll dive more into that later. But they did just beat the Clippers, which is super crazy to see. And, you know, the Western Conference right now is just so close in terms of, you know, the disparity between 1 through 6 in terms of points. They're all so close to each other from a record standpoint. And so any team can move on any given day, and it's kind of a similar thing going on right now in the Eastern Conference. And one of the teams that kind of shot up recently, I mean, they've been up there before, but they've gone back to that point, is the Miami Heat. They've gone back into another groove, and they're sitting in second now. And they've had some big games as of late. They beat the Pacers and the 76ers within 2 days. And the East is just so close. But yeah, they played the Indiana Pacers the other day. It was a big matchup that came down to the wire. And the Pacers, like I said, have been a dark horse team, and they find ways to win, even without their star Victor Oladipo. So when he comes back, I don't even know where this team can go, but they have a lot of potential, and I think a lot of people underestimate them, and they just bring the game to big teams. You know, they don't back down. And that's the same case that happened here against the Miami Heat. They were hot. They were on a 5-game winning streak before that ended, and then they beat Toronto as well. Whereas the Heat have been great all year, and they've just been pretty consistent, staying in the top 3, top 4 in the East. But yeah, with some fluctuations as well. In this particular game between the Pacers and the Heat, the lead changed a lot in the final minutes of the game. It was kind of like a situation where whoever had the ball last was going to win this game, and it's kind of how it ended up being. The Pacers had the lead with 30 seconds left, and then with 6.8 seconds remaining, Dragic hit a floater inside the lane to take the lead again, and then they went on to win 113-112. They kind of held on, and you know, the Pacers didn't get a great look, and so it rattled out, and you know, the Heat took this game in a big Eastern Conference matchup. And a big reason why is because Butler led the way. He was super clutch, you know, down the stretch. He had some clutch buckets to, you know, take back the lead a few times. Like I said, the lead changed a lot, and he was the reason why they were staying in the game. He had 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists. So better contributions from him. I've said in previous podcasts you expect to see a lot more from him because he is probably the biggest star on this Miami Heat team, and he led the way with that. Adebayo, you know, has really come into his own in this league. He had 18 points, 15 boards, and 6 assists. So those are some pretty good numbers for a big man. Great contribution from him. Nunn contributed as well. Being a rookie, he's still, you know, pretty consistent. He had 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. So really both teams had, you know, just great contributions throughout their entire roster. But, you know, neither team really had high volume scorers. You know, the highest scorer for the Heat had 20 points in Jimmy Butler. But it just kind of made this game a little more interesting because you didn't know who was going to score the next bucket. You didn't really know who they were going to go to for the final bucket. And it just came from so many different places, which just really made this game fun to watch. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend looking up the highlights. Definitely a good time, or definitely a good game to watch. But yeah, the Heat with a really big win. But then they had to play the Sixers like the day after beating them a few games ago. The Sixers themselves just came off a tough loss, very close game to Orlando the night before. So between these two teams, just playing the night before on a back-to-back against, and then going to the wire as well, there's bound to be those tired legs. In a big game during the shaping of the East, I've talked about these two teams a lot, and whether or not, who's going to be the ones that really combat with the Bucks in terms of pushing for the Eastern Conference Finals. And I've been in the corner of the Sixers a lot just because of, all the potential that they have. I think that with a lot of the playoff experience they've gained, that they're kind of ready to make that next step. And this game is a big test, even though the Heat haven't been as prolific in terms of being in the playoffs in recent years. They're still a team that's playing extremely well this year, so it's a good test for the Sixers. And it was a great game that ended up going to overtime. The end of regulation was insane, though. Embiid had a lot of great clutch buckets down the stretch, but he actually ended up getting stripped by Jimmy Butler. And then Harrell went down the court the other way and kind of flashed out. Like he was going to drive to the basket, and he flashed back out to three-point land, and he hit a big three for a rookie. I mean, a lot of coaches would have been probably angry that he didn't go to the basket or try and find a player cutting to the basket with him to get an easy bucket on a fast break. But he pulled a Steph Curry, and he pulled up from three confidently, and he knocked it down. And then the Sixers ended up being down 2 at one point, and they intentionally missed a free throw. And Ben Simmons came up with it and laid it up. And when there was only 1 second left on the clock, so it was a huge, huge putback. Terrible boxing out. I don't know what the Heat were doing, but good on Ben Simmons and great work rate to get back in there. And then in OT, kind of the similar thing. It went back and forth between these teams. And with the shot clock off, it was in Jimmy's hands. He wanted the last shot in this game. And he pulled up for an elbow jump shot, and he missed. But he got fouled. I thought this was such a bad foul to give up because on the last shot, you don't want to make it easy and give him free throws. He still had to make it interesting, though. He missed one free throw. He made one, missed one. And then on the other side of the court, Harris missed the very last shot of the game, so the Heat ended up winning 117-116. So the Heat keep coming back. People keep thinking they might fall off. You don't really expect them to be this good for as long as they've been. But they just keep proving themselves time and time again. They beat the Pacers, like I just said. They beat the Sixers twice in the last 5 games. So they've been playing extremely well. On the other side of the ball, though, Embiid had a monster game. He had 35 points and 11 boards. He's been great this year. He could definitely be one of the players that are Defensive Player of the Year, in my opinion. The 76ers beat the Bucks, which I think is a huge, huge performance, and a big part of that is because Embiid played so well. He, totally shut down Giannis, who had one of his worst games of the season. And this is Giannis we're talking about, who's just have been unstoppable all season, to the point where everyone says he's the runaway MVP already this early on in the season. So for Embiid to shut him down, playing super well, he's definitely in that conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. Played really well in this game as well. They just got the short end of the stick. Simmons played pretty well too. He had 15 points, 7 rebounds, and 11 assists. So decent numbers from him. I still think he can, pump up his points total at the end of the games, but can't really ask too much from him. 17 points from Richardson, and then 12 points and 8 rebounds from Harris were the biggest contributions, but they're just outplayed team-wise by the Heat. The Heat had great contributions throughout their squad. Jimmy led the way again, almost had a triple-double in this game. He had 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists, so he played extremely well. Dragic also added 19 points and 7 assists. Robinson and Harrow added 16. Harrow's been a great pickup for them. Great player. And just been very confident in his game. And it showed with that pull-up 3 as well. So just good contribution throughout their entire squad. And a big third quarter is really what propelled them to this win in, a very big, high-profile Eastern Conference matchup. And it makes me think about how, the Sixers go from beating the Bucks to losing to the Magic and losing to the Heat. It's just, I say it every podcast, any team can win on any given day. So there's just so much, disparity between the teams about who could win which game. And it's so interesting to watch. And speaking of that, the Eastern Conference is super close, just like we talked about the Western Conference being super close. Right now, in first place is the Milwaukee Bucks. They're 4 games ahead, so they have a bigger cushion than the Lakers do in their first place. They're 29-5. They've only lost 5 times this year. It's crazy. They're playing really well. But yeah, they have a 4-game cushion, which I don't necessarily see them closing the gap, barring like a serious injury. Hopefully not, knock on wood, to any of the Bucks players. But they've just been so consistent, and big reason, of course, is Giannis and Middleton. Just that whole squad has been playing really well. Right behind them now, though, is the Miami Heat. They're in second place. They're 24-8, and they've had really big wins recently, and that we just talked about, especially the Pacers and beating the Sixers, who I think should be second in the East and fighting to be first. So they've been the surprise for me this season, but deservedly so. They're in second right now. Third place is the Boston Celtics, who haven't been great recently, except for their loss against the Raptors recently. But within the last couple weeks, they've seen a career high night for Tatum points wise, and Jaylen Brown as well. So that's a really good sign. If you could start seeing their numbers start to go up, if their contributions go up, and added to that with Kemba Walker going off like he does, this team could be really good. Fourth is the Raptors, who are still finding ways to win games, even with all the injuries they've had. And so for them to be in fourth place still without their star player and, Pascal Siakam, and, Van Vliet's been kind of out every once in a while with some injuries as well. So they've been holding on pretty well. And then after that is finally the Sixers, who are in fifth, who have had big wins, but then just drop random games. I mean, losing to the Orlando Magic, like, you don't expect to see that necessarily, especially from the Sixers, who are such a good team. And they're 5-5 in their last 10 games, which isn't something you want to see, especially when, you just beat the Bucks. You have that much potential to beat the best team in the NBA right now. But then you drop, games in between that just, you have to be more consistent. And I think that's where they're at right now in terms of evaluating themselves as a team as a whole. Behind them is the Pacers. They're 3.5 back from second place. So that's how close, 2 through 6 is right now. Just separated by 3.5 games. They're 6-4 in their last 10 games. And then the Nets are kind of lurking behind. They're 4 games back from the Pacers. So not necessarily super close, but 2 through 6 in the East are super close. And it's kind of the same story in the West, too, as it really raises the question, which conference is better, Western Conference or Eastern Conference? The West is dominated for years. They've just been, the more high prolific and more consistent conference. And they've, won more championships as of late, of course, too. But this year, it seems like there's a lot more, there's a lot more competition between these two conferences. So that's definitely a debate. Maybe one, we'll debate in the future. But coming up next, we're going to talk about who's hot and who's not. So don't go anywhere.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Miami Heat have really shown what kind of team they're going to be this year. They're legit. They beat the Pacers. They beat the Sixers twice in their last few games. And, they're sitting in second place right now, 4 games back from the Milwaukee Bucks. So they have shown a lot of potential. Whether or not they can withstand that and stay consistent enough to be one of the top teams in the East is yet to be seen. But they're definitely making a case for it. And they are definitely part of this who's hot and who's not. We'll start with the top 5 of who's hot. Starting at number 5. I'm going to just say this one because it's obvious. I'm going to combine them. The Lakers and the Bucks. They're both first in their conferences, so I have to add them into who's hot and who's not. Even though the Lakers are only 6-4 in their last 10, they had that 4-game skid, so not necessarily like blazing hot. But when you're first in the Western Conference for as long as you've been, with a 2.5-game cushion, you have to mention them. They are, easily the best team in the West. Could be the best team in the NBA with a little more consistency and barring any injuries. But the team that has been more consistent, in my opinion, has been the Milwaukee Bucks, who are first in their conference as well, like I said. They have a 4-game cushion, which is more than the Lakers. And these two teams, they've been at the top pretty early on. So it's been decided that they have to be in who's hot and who's not. Coming in at number 4 is the OKC Thunder. They're 7-3 in their last 10, and they're climbing up the West right now. They're 7th in the West right now out of nowhere. And a lot of people, I think, would be shocked about this because who would have expected the Thunder to be doing anything right now in a year where they blatantly have said it's a rebuild year? Russell Westbrook left. KD left a few years ago. That was the start of their demise. They were in the 7 and 8 seed after that. Russ was just a freak of nature, averaging a triple-double a season and propelling them to the playoffs somehow. He was the only reason why, they were still relevant. But now they're still playing really well. And Alexander's a huge part of that. He was acquired in the trade with the Clippers. He's been playing really well. He can make a case for most improved player of the year at the end of the year. So he's the reason why they're probably playing so well right now. Chris Paul as well has got that veteran swagger to him. And Schroeder off the bench, it's a decent squad. And, they've just been playing really well. So they're 4th for me. 3rd is a team we've already talked about, the Utah Jazz. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games, and they're just really starting to get a rhythm in terms of their production. You can't put all of the praise onto Jordan Clarkson, but since he's gotten there, they've kind of righted the ship a little bit. They've been playing a lot better. Good contributions from him off the bench. Donovan Mitchell, though, he's taken off. He's back to where he can be as a player, and then add a torch like Joe Ingles on the wing and a big guy down low and Rudy Gobert, and you have a decent squad. The Utah Jazz are 6 right now and only 3 games out of second place, so they can definitely make that push if they're consistent enough and get enough high volume points from their biggest players. In second for me on who's hot and who's not is the Denver Nuggets, and I put them here just because they're 9-1 in their last 10. In my opinion, they've had somewhat of an easy schedule. But you still got to win these games. And it goes back to my point that any team can win on any given day. And being 9-1 in your last 10 games shows consistency. And it comes from all different types of players as well on the Nuggets, whether it be Murray one night, Harris the next night. Watch Jokic go off the next day. He's a triple-double machine if he wants to be. They just have a lot of pieces that can make them a great team in the West. And they're showing it. They're second right now in the West. 9-1 in their last 10. So that's why they're second on who's hot, who's not. And then number 1 on who's hot, who's not, Miami Heat. They have a 5-game win streak right now. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. And we've talked about it in the last segment. They've had big wins. They're second in the East. I'm not going to go too deep into it because we've already talked about it, but Jimmy Butler is starting to take control of the team. They have great team contributions throughout the entire team. Dragic, is contributing as well. I think he's in a bench role at this point. Kendrick Nunn is a good rookie, as well as Harrow. So they've just got a lot of good pieces right now that are clicking. I'm actually going to give some honorable mentions as well. This one, a couple of my honorable mentions are going to be questioned. I understand that. I'm just letting you know ahead of time why. One of my honorable mentions is going to be the New Orleans Pelicans, only because they're on a 4-game win streak. They're 5-5 in their last 10, and they just beat the Rockets 127-112. They beat the Pacers, who we talked about as a really good team in the East, 120-98. They beat the Nuggets, who are in my who's hot, who's not already, 112-100. And they beat the Blazers 102-94. So those are some pretty impressive wins for a Pelicans team that has struggled mightily to start the season. They're second to last in the West. I get that. But they've had really big wins, and they showed a lot of promise. And I think Lonzo Ball just had a great night and another win. So, a lot of things are clicking for them right now, and I think they can make some noise in a West that's already stacked. So, and they don't even have Zion Williamson back either. So, don't sleep on the Pelicans. And then I'm also going to shout out the Golden State Warriors, who are last in the Western Conference. So it's kind of it's definitely questionable as why I'm saying this, but before losing to the Mavericks, the Mavericks that scored, a franchise high of 24 3-pointers on them, they were on a 4-game winning streak, and in that win streak it included beating the Houston Rockets on Christmas Day on the big stage. They beat the Houston Rockets probably because, they have the Rockets number, and the Rockets just can't seem to beat the Warriors even without Steph and Clay. And they also beat the Pelicans as well, who I just talked about. Both these teams are still bottom of the West. I get that. But, I think right now those two teams deserve a little bit of praise just because they've found winning ways. And, maybe they can build on that and turn this into something that turns their season around. You never know. But moving over to who's not hot, coming in at number 5 is the Phoenix Suns. They're 2-8 in their last 10 games. They lost to teams like the Warriors, but they have had a tough schedule, so I give them a benefit of the doubt. They're in 11th right now in the West. Like I said, they have had a very tough schedule. They've been playing top-tier teams in both conferences, so that's why they're number 5. Number 4 for me is the Wizards, who are 2-8 in their last 10 games. And they have games where they've lost to the Knicks, to the Pistons, who have struggled recently as well. So for them to lose to teams like that is why they're so low on my list. I get that they still don't have John Wall, but they have a great player, an all-star player in Bradley Beal. And so I think they could definitely do some more things than what they've been doing. And they are 13th in the East. So that's just a little sad for me. Another team that I think has been underperforming, they're third on my list, are the Sacramento Kings. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if you guys remembered a couple podcasts ago. I had them in the hot column for my who's hot, who's not. But now they're on the other side of fortune. They have lost 7 games in a row. They're 2-8 in their last 10. And they lost to the Timberwolves, who have been terrible this year. The Phoenix Suns, who are already in this list, and the Grizzlies, who actually have been pretty decent. I don't understand how they've been winning so many games. John Morant is just a freak of nature. He's going to be a stud in this league for a while. But even still, I think the Sacramento Kings have so many good pieces that could make them better in this league. But to lose 7 in a row, they have to be in my category for not hot. In front of them, number 2, a team that they lost to, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the reason because is they're 1-9 in their last 10 games, and they lost to the Warriors, the Cavs, and the Pelicans. Those are all some of the worst teams in the Western Conference, and in the Cavs in the Eastern Conference, and they've just struggled. It doesn't make sense though, because they have great players in Cat and Andrew Wiggins and Jeff Teague. I don't know what it is about the T-Wolves, but they can't catch a break, and they're falling in the Western Conference as the Warriors and the Pelicans are rising. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the T-Wolves in the very last place in the Western Conference soon. They're 13th right now. And then the number 1 team who's just not hot is the Hawks. They've lost 10 in a row, and by average, they're losing by 11 points per game. They're last in the East, even worse than New York Knicks, and they have the worst record in the NBA of 6-27. So they are struggling mightily. I feel so bad for Trae Young because he is a budding star. I would not be surprised to see if this guy moves and creates his own super team somewhere else in the next couple of years. I just don't see them rebuilding. But, like I said, they have been struggling. So they're number one on my list. Some honorable mentions, the Pistons, who are 3-7 in their last 10. They have good players, though. They struggle as well. Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond. I'm missing someone else as well. I think Reggie Jackson, if he's still there. They're a pretty good squad. I mean, you shouldn't be losing as much as you are. I have to talk the Knicks because the Knicks are still pretty low, even though they've been winning some games as of late. They've been a little bit better. They're not last in the East anymore, so they can celebrate about that. And then the Warriors and the Pelicans are part of my honorable mention as well. Even though they're on the hot side, I have to say them because they're they're the worst teams in the Western Conference right now, so I've got to add them to that list as well. So they're on both lists just to kind of save my credibility. But last but certainly not least, I'm going to give you my top 5 players of the decade. So stay with us to see if your favorite player made the list.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about which teams have been hot and which teams have just not been hot in the NBA as of late. We're talking about teams being hot or not. So now we're going to talk about some individual accolades. Now that the decade is ending, this is my last podcast before the new year. So I wanted to break down, which players I think really defined this decade. And it's funny, I swear that I didn't do any research before just thinking these players up, just because I wanted to see where my opinions kind of, ended up being with the real analysts on, NBA TV and NBA.com, all that stuff. But then afterwards, I picked my 5, and then afterwards I looked up on NBA.com. It was the absolute the same top 5. They do a thing where they have a first team, a second team, and a third team. And their first team was my top 5. So what I did is I chose 2 guards and 3 forwards. Coming in at number 1 for a guard for me was Stephen Curry. And for me, this is a no-brainer. People can question this all they want. Curry came into the league in 2009, 2010, didn't really start making a lot of noise until 2012. People question him because of his ankle injuries, whether or not he could sustain, his career. Basically, a lot of things he was questioned a lot, and he didn't get into the playoffs his first few seasons. And then when he did, he got beat out by teams like a Popovich-led Spurs, or he lost to Lob City in LA, the Clippers at the time, who were really good. And then all of a sudden, they broke out on the scene. They had breakout years. And in those breakout years where they really soared into stardom, a big reason why is because of Stephen Curry. In 2014, 2015, he became MVP for the first time ever. In 2015, 2016, he became the first unanimous MVP in a back-to-back MVP season. So he followed up his first MVP season with an even better historic season, and then went on to win 3 championships in 5 straight finals appearances. So for me, that takes the cake. 2 MVPs, 3 championships. Whether or not he was there in the beginning of the decade or not, he has to be in this list, because he not only that, not only his awards that he won, he changed the face of basketball in this decade. He's the reason why it's a jump shooting league now. He's the reason why centers are pulling up from deep, because Steph Curry made it a thing. A whole generation is now following how Steph Curry plays, and I think that speaks volumes to just how unique he is as a player and just how prolific he is as a scorer. So he's in my top 5 for sure. The next guard I'm going to talk about is James Harden, who has been so consistent over the last few years. He was in the Thunder in the beginning of the decade, kind of just a contributor, and then when he went to the Rockets, he became an unstoppable force, just a prolific scorer. And if it wasn't for outstanding performances like Stephen Curry's, or Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double, or Giannis going off last year, he could have had 3 or 4 MVPs in this last decade, and he didn't, just because other players were just that much better than him. But he was always there. He was the runner-up year after year after year, and I think that speaks to his consistency. Because, Steph Curry wasn't there year after year after year. He won those 2 MVPs, kind of took a backseat to Kevin Durant. But James Harden was always in that conversation. And, he didn't win any NBA championships, that's true. But that's also because he, went full, competitive. Like, he went up against a Warriors team that is just historic, just too good to even try to beat. So that's tough for him to even try and get into the finals, let alone, beating out the Warriors. So he's still in my top 5. He's one of the best players of this decade, without a question. And then I had 3 forwards as well. The first forward I'm going to say is Kawhi Leonard. And some people might question this, but I think it's definitely deservedly so. He's been one of the best players of this decade. I think he has 2 championships as well. One of them being beating the Miami Heat, and he was Finals MVP as well. The Miami Heat team that had LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. So that was super impressive. But to me, it was nowhere near as impressive as this most recent championship he's won. Because when Toronto was faced up against the Bucks, I didn't even think he was going to beat the Bucks. I wasn't even sure if they were going to beat the Sixers. But he willed it so. Like, he had that last-second winner against the 76ers to beat them. He shut down Giannis and beat them. And then to go into the finals and just take over, he wins final MVP and another championship. So, and he's also been one of the best defensive players of the decade as well, which is another reason why he's in this list. He's won Defensive Player of the Year as well. So he's just been a force to be reckoned with. Another player, I have to put him in here, of course, LeBron James. We talked about him very early on in this podcast. Male athlete of the decade. I don't even need to say it. He's one of the best players ever to play this game. And then my last forward that I had to put in here was Kevin Durant. And a lot of people were going to think, he's soft. He doesn't really deserve the championships he won with the Warriors. But I think all of that is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I mean, he was a great player before he even came to the Warriors. One of the best in the NBA. And just a solid number 2 behind a LeBron James, where a lot of people can, definitely fight for Kevin Durant being the best in the NBA. I wouldn't even argue with them, to be honest with you, because he's the most gifted scorer I've ever seen. The way he can rise up and shoot over anybody and just be that pure with his shot, it's great to see. And then he led the Thunder to a finals. They ended up losing to a historic Miami Heat team. That's a tough loss. I think the Thunder probably should have won the year that the Warriors came back from down 3-1 to beat them. I'm not sure how they collapsed so bad, but a big reason for the Thunder being that good and being in that position up 3-1 was because of Kevin Durant. Yeah, he gave it up, but the Warriors gave up a 3-1 lead too, and they're still one of the best teams in history without question. And then, Kevin Durant made the decision that, he's given all he's had to the Thunder, and he wants a new journey, his next chapter. And then when he did that, he went to the Warriors. On a team that was already so good, he became the most important component. He was the one that led the Warriors to the finals. He's the one that took over in the finals. He got 2 finals MVPs. And if it wasn't for an injury in this last finals, he would have won the finals again. He got injured very early on, but in the finals, I'm saying, he got injured very early on in the game he returned. But if he hadn't, I definitely think the Warriors would have turned it around and won that series because he's just that gifted. Some honorable mentions for this decade team. Chris Paul. He's probably the last true point guard in terms of playing style. Steph Curry's kind of changed how we view point guards in terms of their scoring and their contributions. Chris Paul, he's been great throughout the entire decade. Being with the Hornets and then being with Lob City and then going to the Rockets. He's just been very consistent, and I think he deserves a mention. Russell Westbrook as well, who's averaged a triple-double a couple seasons, had an MVP season, was on that Thunder team that Kevin Durant was on that was just so good. One of the best scorers in the league. Anthony Davis, he wasn't necessarily in the league the whole decade, but when he came onto the scene, he was an instant threat, and he's the reason why the Pelicans could change, turn things around so much, become a playoff team all of a sudden. And for me, an honorable mention is, Dwayne Wade, because he won a couple championships with the Miami Heat. And then even after, they left, he was one of those classic players that could always find a way to win games. And he was, one of the best players for me, honestly. But there are so many players to mention. I mean, Kobe, Carmelo Anthony, Blake Griffin. I could go on and on with players that deserve to be mentioned in this. But those are my top 5 for this decade. Steph Curry, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Kevin Durant. There could be a lot of arguments for different players, but that's mine. This next generation is going to be super fun to watch. Honestly, the next decade team probably going to be led by Luka Doncic, Giannis. I can even say AD being in there still. But it's going to be exciting to see for sure. But I think that about does it for this podcast. So thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm Isiah Quiroz. Thank you, and have a happy and safe New Year's, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.